Hey everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Modern SaaS Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Mark Staggi. Mark joined us as a VP of Customer Success here at Avoma, and there was one big topic that we were discussing internally. And I thought, Mark, why don't we discuss this into a podcast episode? So, Mark, would you let the team know your background, your experience, and why you're one of the best people to talk about the topic that we're going to talk today?
Yeah, no, happy to be here. Quick bio of myself. So I've been in software for now 20 plus years. So since the end of the 90s, have seen a lot of changes in software. Of course, the first role that I had was leading an account management team. And this was way before customer success was a thing, way before, really way before SaaS was a thing. And have seen this evolution over the last 20 some years, which has been amazing. Super excited to be at Avoma and really excited for the topic today. It's a great topic and just looking forward to the conversation.
And just to tell the team or here, what we are going to talk today is about churn. SaaS and churn go really hand in hand. We've talked about it, but there's also a nuance to churn. We wanted to talk about big accounts, big customers leaving, and what is that impact is going to, how are you going to handle that? And obviously, Mark, the reason I felt why you should be the one who should be invited to this podcast because your background, you worked at large enterprise companies, high growth companies where your customers were Fortune 100, Fortune 500 customers. And you also worked at companies where your customers were SMB. So you have this best of the both worlds kind of experience. And I thought that would be a great perspective to have here. How much importance, because the SMB churn is a little different. When you talk about the big customer churn is a little different. But before we get into, I have lots of questions. A lot of it comes around how we are handling things at Avoma. But I thought that these questions or discussion would be helpful for our SaaS community as well. So, Mark, let me ask you, first of all, it's obvious, but let's start with the obvious one. Why does churn matter?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great way to kick it off. And how I think about it too is, of course, churn matters. So gross churn, the customers that are leaving, are an important factor in the overall success and healthier business. But really, what matters most, and the one thing that I am constantly obsessed with, is the net retention. So what does the actual combination of customers downgrading, customers expanding, customers churning, what does that look like on a month-to-month basis? And how do you make sure that you're driving that forward? I think in SaaS, there's really no metric that's more important than net retention. When it comes down to it, that is kind of king in many ways. And one example that I always like to think about is just what's the difference between just a few percentage points increase or decrease in net retention. And if you think about it, there's this example I've always used. You have a $10 million company, you're growing 20% a year, your new business, decent growth, right? And over time, that's going to continue to compound and add. And say you had a 5% loss in terms of net retention. So you're at a 95% net retention rate, which again, most people would say, oh, that's pretty decent.
Yeah.
We're keeping 95% of customers around on a yearly basis. That's not bad. But over a 5-year period, even with that 20% growth, you're going to grow your company. You're going to grow from 10 million to about $20 million. And again, some people would say, hey, that's decent. We doubled in 5 years. If you look, though, at what the change could be, if you went from 95% to 105%, so you now shift your focus on how do we grow these accounts? What does value mean to our accounts, and how are we constantly trying to grow them? That shift makes a $10 million difference at the end of those 5 years. So now you're a $30 million company. And you could even go to the extreme and say, what if we could really land and expand these deals? What if we could get 130% net retention year over year, which is possible. It sounds like a huge stretch to some people. I'm sure there's people listening out there that say, whoa, we're not even at 100. But you look at some companies like Snowflake, for example, and they're at 170%. They're crushing it in their numbers. That 130%, though, if you use that same example of starting at 10 million, you end year 5 at 75 million.
Yeah.
So the impact is enormous to the bottom line. And again, really why I think that net retention is one of the most important things that a company should be focused on.
I love it. I love it. And when you think about it, the whole point of retention comes down to, yes, on one hand, you can say that retention is about the customers are not being churned. But when you put that into net revenue retention, NRR metric, there's a lot of emphasis on the expansion itself. And the whole point
Yeah.
of expansion, the customers will not expand if they're not happy with you. So the churn is kind of an implicit when you're trying to really build that relationship, grow that relationship. You want to make sure that obviously they're not going to churn. So while a lot of the times early on when in SaaS, the emphasis was given to avoiding churn, reducing churn. But when you think about that, hey, if your customers are delighted, if they're happy, they're going to expand. And why don't you rather focus that energy on that expansion story itself? Let me ask you, Mark, when I think about, and obviously, I feel like there is this whole a separate podcast topic now. We should do it one more time. Can every business have that expansion opportunity? How should they think about growing expansion? Because sometimes you sell some services or product and that's all you do. And so there has to be a different thought process to think about how do we unlock those expansion opportunities, maybe different product lines, different services, extra add-ons, or whatever it could be. But if I not try to get digress into that topic, and maybe we should do that separate conversation, coming back to the churn itself, churn also, as we talked about early on, also, we know that a lot of it that we control, but a lot of it is that it's not out of our control as well. So when you think about churn, Mark, most of the time when customer, let's say this big account tells you that, hey, they're going to churn, how do you handle this situation? Like, do you try to immediately go and try to save them, or do you do something just, hey, you know what, let it go now, it's already too late, and just soak it in and learn their feedback? What's the approach when you hear this bad news? How do you handle that situation?
Yeah, no, that's one topic too that we could, I think all these we could expand, into 30-minute sessions. First though, let me actually address the piece that you mentioned around what is in your control and what isn't. And then I'll lead into the other part because I think it's important. And many times, I've heard through, people on my team or through other leaders I've talked to that, they've said, oh, well, this, we lost this customer, but, it was because of these other reasons, right? And it was because of these reasons outside of our control. A stakeholder had left, and then that left us in a compromised place, or this had happened. And the way that I think about it, though, is there's really only one reason ever that a customer would churn that's fully outside of your control. And it does happen. It rarely though happens in enterprise, but that's really when a customer goes under.
Mm,
A customer completely has to shut down their business,
mm,
and you don't have full control over that. I would actually argue you have a little bit of control over that though still, depending on your product and depending on the value you're providing. Because as a company, most of us out here, we're providing a solution to our customers that should be saving them time, saving them money, making them more efficient, which should help their bottom line. But you don't fully control that, right? You can't control your customer's fate. Other than that, though, every other piece I have always looked at as just really an excuse. When it comes down to it, every churn that I've ever analyzed and seen post has been avoidable. Now, to the question on what do you do when it happens, first, I think you always have to try and save an account. Now, many times it could be too late because once they do give you that churn notice, typically they've already made up their mind with another vendor. They might have signed a contract with another vendor. I mean, you are late to the game and you missed out on a lot of queues that probably happened starting a year ago. And we'll talk about that later. But you've missed out on tons of queues over time. They've made that decision, and typically that's a pretty hard decision already. But even with that being said, you owe it to your company, you owe it to your customers to dive in with them and to really figure out what's the root, what's happening. For a large customer, immediately what you need to do is you need to do a quick analysis yourself. So you need to dive into with your team, why do we think this is happening? What does their data look like? What cues have we missed along the year that might have led up to this? Usually too, you want to the next day be at their office. I mean, I'm a big proponent in business is personal. People make decisions that are personal. And to fully understand that, you have to sit down with them. So I've done this many times in my career where someone has come saying, hey, I don't think we're going to continue. I've met with my team. And the next day, I'm from the Bay Area here. Next day, I'm in Manhattan, on a red eye overnight, and I am at their office and I'm letting them know, hey, we are here to make sure that you're making the right decision. Let's talk about what we can do. Is there still a path forward? But I want to have that true, real conversation with them and see what we can do to put a plan together, if that is still an option, and then work with them. And if there's something we've done wrong, prove to them that we can overcome that, prove to them that we can execute on a success plan for them and come to a positive solution for everybody.
I love it. And I love the fact that even though they are churning, you still want to invest, fly there, and it may not still work out. They may still decide that no, the decision has already been
Yeah.
done and it's already too late. But you're still showing that the level of effort, that the care that you're doing. But I want to deep dive into one area. Once that news is still it's imminent that they're going to churn, how do we handle that? But there's also something that you talked about, that the signals that you could have learned throughout the period that you were working with them. What are the signals, Mark, that they should be observing, that we're already late? How could we avoid this situation? Let's talk about in a minute that what should we do. But even before I get into that, what should companies do to learn that, hey, this is early signal that they're going to churn? So are there any examples that come to top of your mind?
Yeah, no, there's a lot. I mean, here we probably could literally talk about 20 examples. I'll keep it to two. One is, like I mentioned, I think you really need to go back in time. Churn typically doesn't happen, especially again with a large enterprise account. They're not going to make that decision a month before renewal, 2 months before renewal, 3 months before renewal. A lot of it starts on day one. So I think what you always need to do is first think about your onboarding experience, your implementation process. And what does that look like? How can you make sure that you optimize that to provide value, to understand what value is, and to do that quick? You have a customer that has just signed a deal with you. They're excited. They've given you a check for $500,000, $1 million, whatever it is. And they are choosing you for a reason, and they want to get value out of that product. So I think you have to always start with really doing a deep dive on what your implementation process is, having certain ways that you can have touch points with different personas during that implementation. So you always know from the end user to the key admin to the executive sponsor on the customer side, what's their pulse during implementation. How do you make sure that time to value is condensed? Because no one, again, wants to sign a check. If you're an executive at any company, you don't want to sign a check for $1 million and then start using a solution 6 months from now. You want to get value quick. So making sure that you understand what that time to value is. If you should be getting customers to value in 30 days, and you have customers that are at 60, 90 days of implementation, there should be literal alarm bells going off where whoever's handling your implementation, customer success, professional services, they are focused on, oh my gosh, this is a churn risk already.
Yeah.
They're only 60 days in, but this is a churn risk right now. And we need to unblock what's getting in the way. So that's important at the very start. But then throughout, it's really making sure that you have a deep understanding of the customer, their value and what that means, relationships that you've built across the organization. So like I mentioned, there's a common excuse always given that, we deal with the VP of sales and they left, which happens in sales. They left, they went to another company, and now we're stuck and we don't know anyone.
Yeah.
You should never get in that position. So I think always having the understanding of who's the highest stakeholder that you're connected with, tracking that. And I'm a big believer in everything is tracked in your CRM. So you
Hmm.
know that I have an advocate at the executive level, but then
Hmm.
I have advocates at other levels? Do I have advocates across the organization too? So not only in our case, we deal a lot with the sales persona. Do I
Hmm.
have a relationship and an advocate in the VP of sales, but also do I have an advocate in the VP of marketing or the CMO?
Hmm.
Do I have an advocate in the VP of CS, which is another really important user of the platform, the CS org?
Yeah.
And making sure that that's always tracked, that's mapped, and you have a really good backup plan. That's super important as well, because that is the one big thing that will catch you flat-footed when you have sponsorship changes and you have no idea who's who at the company.
I love this, Mark. I think the way that even this, in line with your earlier point, that while we think that there are certain things that we control and certain things that are out of our control, I love the fact that if you really, really be hard on yourself, everything is in your control to avoid that churn. To your point,
Yeah,
yes, companies run out of business. There's only one, honestly, situation I might think that some natural kind of situation happens, war situation or disaster, natural disaster, that's the only thing that you can control. But
yeah,
literally, if your business product service was supposed to help your customer to grow their revenue, save time, they would not have shut down, they would be successful on their own. So a lot of it is that you fail in helping them, and then there are all these product usage is not great, leadership
right.
leaving, organization changes, the delays in implementation and delaying the time to value. Those are all things that we honestly control. The leadership change, yes, we don't control the change that's happening, but the relationship, having that with one individual versus all the users involved in that customer's life cycle,
Yeah,
could have been something on our control. So I love this perspective because it
yep.
does put still you as a owner, rather than we trying to feel nice about ourselves and blame it on some other external situation and feel good
Yeah.
about it. This is such a refreshing thought that no, churn, there is nothing that it's not in our control. 99% it's in our control and we can fix it. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
also talked about a lot of these examples where how to identify the signals early on as well. One of the things, Mark, let's say even now we could not save this account, we did not proactively, for whatever reason we failed, maybe organizations did not have that level of customer success emphasis early on. And to be completely candid, at Avoma we did have that problem where we had customer success functions for the sake of it, but we were not truly strategic. We were not truly thinking about these things proactively. And a lot of these things, that's why obviously you're here to fix the kind of growth that we are seeing. We are not able to handle. Did not have this level of emphasis being strategic and proactive. Uh, but now the reality is that once in a while you'll hear your customer is leaving, and now you're trying to understand, okay, what should
Yeah.
be the first few steps? It's an imminent, it's going to happen, unfortunately, whatever reasons they're leaving. Now what do we do? How do we take it from here? What are 3 or 4 different things that you will do with customer, that you will do with the organization? What's the program that you will think that to run after this?
Yeah, and I think there, one of the most important things is really making sure that you have a practice in place to run postmortems
Mm.
and
Mm.
you take the time to do it every single time. And it's actually funny because this morning I came across an article on Harvard Business Review
Mm.
around the hero mentality that some companies have, where they celebrate there's always a fire you're fighting, and you have this
Mm.
great Navy SEAL team that you bring in, and they save all these customers, and you're in this
Mm.
hero mentality. Um, I think customer or companies get in that mentality and they get stuck in a rut, which is
Mm.
a pretty bad thing, because
Interesting.
they don't take the time to think back and reflect. And I
Mm.
think it always starts with that. If you do have a large customer that leaves, I think there's a couple simple things, and it's so simple that you need to do. One, you just need to make sure that you're taking that time to do an internal retrospective. So
Mhm.
you're doing that postmortem, you're analyzing everything, their product usage. Like you mentioned, product usage can be a big factor in churn for
Mhm.
sure. But you really need to have a deeper understanding of what that means. Why
Mm.
does this feature matter? And you should always be able to answer that. Why does it matter to what persona as well? Certain features matter to the end users. What impact do they have into churn? certain features will have an impact into leadership, and then being able to share ROI with their team, that
Hmm.
has a different impact. So analyzing all that data is important, and doing that too cross-functionally. So it
Hmm.
should always be not just a CS-led initiative, but it should be CS, product, sales,
Hmm.
engineering, everyone getting together, doing their own analysis, coming together in a meeting with ideas on, what really led to this churn, what could we have done better, and then putting some of those actions in place to actually fix the things that you see. So
Hmm.
when you notice that, hey, their adoption in this one feature was 10%.
Hmm.
Well, why is that? And what can we do to increase awareness? What can we do within product? What can we do
Hmm.
within onboarding? What can we do within the sales, cycle, right? All of those pieces in the customer journey.
Hmm.
How can you fix that? Put that into a project plan and actually drive change to get that done, because you're so busy, and especially at a startup, you're going to be focused on a million things you need to do. But taking that time
Absolutely.
to reflect and get key kind of action plans is so important. And then the other quick piece though is having that
Hmm.
conversation with the customer after the fact as well.
Hmm.
I think that you always need to make sure that you're driving a retro call with the customer after the
Hmm.
fact. Now they're leaving, they're going to be busy, it's going to be hard to get time, but I think it's one thing that hopefully, if you had a good relationship over time, you're still able to say, hey, we really would appreciate a half hour to learn your
Hmm.
perspective of everything that led up to this, and have a script and walk through the key things from how did implementation go to what
Hmm.
did you learn at your first quarterly business review, and what does value mean, why did you go to a competitor if you did, and use it not only as a time to be, I think a lot of people say, oh, this is a great time for us to be empathetic and
Hmm.
just listen, which is true.
Hmm.
But I also think this is a great time to ask difficult questions. So if the customer said, oh, I'm going to, partially why we churned is this one feature you didn't have. In that
Hmm.
call, it's your only chance, it's probably your last chance to ever talk to them. And you need to do it in the right way, but I think
Yeah,
you should challenge them always, and that leaves a good impression on people. So even though that conversation should have been had months ago, I would say, okay,
agree.
great, well, let's talk about that feature then. What's the impact to your business on that? Because we see this as it's going to make a 0.05% difference in your
Hmm.
productivity. So what else is behind it? It can't be just that. And again, taking the time to challenge them in a professional, of course, way, because this might be the last time you get to talk to them. And those learnings from that are going to be key on both sides of the coin.
I love it. I think there are so many nuances here. The way you mentioned that, not taking their answer at the face value. Oh, because you didn't have this feature, now you suddenly like, okay, I listened actively, and because they said that this feature was there, that's why they churned. No, you can still
Yeah.
challenge even at that time. Try to understand. I think the best part is about this is still trying to uncover really what is our mistake we did in this entire process. And by the way, everything that you said, what we should do post they've given this notice that now they're going to churn, yes, all of these things should have been done already. Hey, what was the value, where we failed, all of that should have done
Yeah.
proactively earlier in the cycle. But let's say for some reason, as you rightly said, there are millions of things going around, things get deprioritized, you're not able to keep on top of every single thing, and once in a while a situation like this happen. But even in those situations, really asking those five whys. You said something, why did that feature matter, how that would have impacted your business, and trying to dig deeper, peeling that onion will be the really right way to do it. Let's say, Mark, obviously now the way I'm thinking about this is, hopefully this was not, let's say, the big customer that you are going to churn is not the only customer. There are now all these other big accounts that you already have. The way I'm thinking about why this is, while they're churning, but the reason we still need to invest this time and try to analyze, even you talked about the product usage, why did this feature is not getting used and they only had so much usage for this particular account. The value for me there now, the way I'm thinking based on what you explained, is now who are other customers like this who are showing similar patterns.
Yeah.
And those are going to be my high priority accounts that I need to go and quickly adopt and try to fix it. So, yes, these are wake up calls, these are learnings, but don't focus too much on the
Hmm.
5% or whatever the revenue that you lost because of this one big account. What about the rest of the 20-30% from these other revenue that you're getting from other big accounts? And so that might be
Yeah.
also perspective why this would be valuable. How should we think about, obviously churn is bad, it hurts, you're never happy, but then you have these other customers. How do you convince your team to, let's move on now, let's focus on this time? How much time they need to keep worrying about the customers that are
Yeah.
churned so far?
Yeah, no, and I think you actually answered the question yourself pretty well. You're right. The Once a churn happens, you do that kind of post mortem. You have a good plan of action. You need to say, okay, that is done. Like
Mm,
once that piece is done, you're done. There's no more time that you need to spend on that. But what you need to do is spend a large amount of time on those learnings and how that applies to prioritization with your current account. So as you go through some of those learnings, you might even say, let's reevaluate the health score that we have.
mm,
Most SaaS companies have a health score they put together that gives them a good way to prioritize accounts. There may be something in there that you've learned that really makes a difference in churn.
mm,
And now you can arm your CSM team with another data point that they can use so they can get ahead of that. But I think it really does, all revolve around how can you be proactive? How can you prioritize with a lot of stuff going on? How can you make sure that you're focused on the right conversations with the right customers at the right time? And, that does start with first, you have to understand value and what that value means, and then have those indicators that are showing if they're not receiving that value that can drive the CSM's daily and weekly behavior.
yeah, and the reason I think this was the way, while you were explaining, I was thinking about it. There is a morale effect in the company. The when a big account churns, everyone talks about it, and people start questioning a
Yeah.
lot of different things. Are we not providing value? So I think it's an important exercise for us as a leaders as well to, when we learn these things, taking that feedback and then saying, hey, we screwed up here, these are the mistakes that we made, but guess what, we have 20 other accounts like this, and now we are going to address these things with these 20 other accounts that we already have and make sure that this mistake never happens again. But proactively sharing, and when the churn happens, there is this sadness that you're going to, entire organization going to experience. But what you're really trying to suggest them that let's look at what's ahead, and we still have these many other accounts, that let's go and work and continue to grow those relationships. So bringing them back and inspiring them with the positivity is probably, the mindset
Yeah.
is really important.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously churn is something we should be worrying about, but we want to start moving to the next, making sure learnings are becoming actionable as well.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And it actually, for me too, it gets me to think about the importance of voice of customer at a
Mm,
company. And the voice of customer program, or whatever you want to put it into, it isn't just how do we get, product feature requests from the
mm,
customer and give that to engineering and product, or how do we get bugs and complaints and
mm,
bad news into the ears of the company so we can improve.
mm,
But a lot of times it is what is working well, and I always believe you should have weekly, like the CS team has so many conversations every week. They should always create these playlists of, what are the calls that really worked well?
mm,
What are those areas of feedback or bugs, and share those out with the company so the company can hear, the bad, which we need to learn and improve on, but they can
mhm.
also hear the good, because 90% of what customers are going to say is going to be super positive and really good. There's a lot, typically, customers that are renewing year over year. They've been with you for 3 years at this point. They love your product, and
Yeah.
that, positivity, the ROI that it makes on their business, the increase in productivity, all those good stories that they share should be celebrated and kind of passed throughout the company for sure. Along with, hey, here, again, you don't want to look at the world through rose-colored glasses and say,
Correct.
"Oh, look at this one happy customer. We're great. We don't have to worry. Let's just kick back." There needs to be that fire of improving, But I always believe in balance there. That's huge.
I love that because those positive stories is how you build the momentum, and that positivity, the excitement, it's infectious as well. And so that's why you want to show
Oh
people that,
yeah,
hey, all the things that you're doing great are also working. There are a lot of impact that we're doing with our a lot of customers. But yes, once in a while, it's we are not perfect. We make mistakes. These are things that we screwed up here. And let's try to address those gaps as well. So I think we talked a lot of great topics, and as you rightly said early on, that maybe there are we should have different topics for each one, go deeper as well, and we'll do these more sessions with you, Mark. Any parting thoughts with the community here?
keep your ears as close to the customer as you can, is maybe the last parting thought. And in today's age and world of a lot of Zoom still, I mean, we're getting back into some in-person visits. Use the time you have to get to know people personally. I think that is so
Mm,
important. You're meeting a lot of customers in their home, in their
mm.
office. They may have dogs, they may have all kinds of chaos going on. Use that as a way to really connect in an authentic, true way. I think that also makes a huge difference, in just building long-term relationships.
I love it. Beautiful thought. Let's end it right there. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully, we brought Mark lots of wisdom here. I could clearly see all the mistakes that I have done in my last 2, 3 years of running Avoma. I'm so glad, Mark, you joined us here in our journey to build really the world class experience for customer success. For our listeners, if you're watching this on YouTube or listening on any podcast apps, do give us 5-star ratings, like our YouTube video, subscribe to our channel. We are going to bring a lot of these guests also, not just from Avoma, but also from externally, and discuss these topics even more. Yes, these are probably have discussed in the past, but we'll try to take these topics and go deeper into all these areas as well. So thank you once again. Bye bye.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.